Okay, so I wanted to do a little response video to a video Orcastraw made about money in speedrunning and the contradictions people make regarding money in speedrunning. A point that I would very much disagree with in multiple ways. And he specifically refers to Woolly World at one point and to comments that I had made, and I feel like it's fair to respond if he's going to make comments referring things that I'd said to him that are misrepresented in the video, I feel. So, the first point that he makes is about how people are fine with money in speedrunning and the cost prohibition of money in speedrunning if it benefits them. And I feel like this is a very negative and wrong way to go about it. And I say that because the point that he brings up is that in some ways money is allowed and in other ways it isn't. For example, with Mario 64. Here, there's a point that, well, N64 is a main version, and if you don't have an N64, you're being left out because you have to spend money on buying an N64. He also makes the point with Ocarina of Time and the IQ, of course, which is now no longer relevant since other glitches. And I will admit, I don't follow Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time that closely because I've seen them so much, I just don't bother with them that much. But with both of these games, I feel like with Ocarina of Time there may be a point, because the IQ I feel is something different to what would normally be expected of a console for running a game. But in other ways I can also see, because it is an official release of the game and there isn't really anything wrong in that regard because it is an official release. And I feel like the way I would categorize money in speedrunning is that official releases of games have nothing to do with the cost of speedrunning, because it is simply like buying a game in a shop to play casually. It's not a limit to speedrunning. If you buy a game to play it, you're buying money to play a game. It's not a case of, oh well, you have to buy it for speedrunning, so you bug it if you don't. That's not how it works. And I mean, with Mario 64, the way it's done, you can argue why not just have it where all are allowed with VVC instead of specifying that N64 has to be the main platform. But overall, I just don't really see a lot of the argument that is being made there. With the IQ, I can partially see it because of the way it's a Chinese console and things like that, but it is still official console, official release. And I feel like there is no limit if it's an input method. Well, no limit's the wrong word. I feel like an input method should not be factored in as a cost of speedrunning, because it's just a case of, even if you just wanted to not speedrun the game, it is the sort of stuff that would be required just to play it. And that is a copy of the game, controller, console. So if you want to play Mario 64, you're obviously going to need a console that can play the game. You're obviously going to need a controller that can play the game. You're obviously going to need a copy of the game itself. And if you have all of these, then I don't see what the problem is. Or if you want to speedrun the game and you need to buy these, I also don't see what the problem is, since you are buying these to play the game. It's not like you can speedrun without these. I think if there is a cost in speedrunning which requires something extra to the cost of buying a game and buying a console to play it, that counts as the cost of speedrunning. And there, I feel like regulation should be done to make sure things don't get out of hand. And the point that he's making is where things that go into that category are not allowed as a general rule, but people are okay with spending money on different versions of the game that are faster. And I just feel like different versions of the game fall into the same category. He brings up how if you have a Wii U copy of Rayman Legends, then you might have to buy a PC version if you want to run the fastest version. If you owned a, I think he said a digital version of Little Big Planet with 2 minutes slower. So if you want to run that 2 minutes faster, so if you want to run that game, you would need a digital version and not a disc. I feel like that goes into the cost of speedrunning. Not into the cost of speedrunning, but into just the cost of owning the game. Though I don't feel are actually valid points, because it's a case of owning the game. And in some of these cases, he brings it up as being almost a way to benefit the people who already run the game. And that argument could be made with Mario 64. A lot of people were just more used to N64, so weren't keen on Wii VC. I don't know if Wii VC is actually faster or whatever, but because again I don't follow it too closely, but in a hypothetical scenario where Wii VC is faster and people insist on N64, the argument that it's done to benefit runners who already play the game could be made, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think it is. But anyhow, the two main things he brings up is that two different strategies that could be used in Twilight Princess and Yoshi's Woolly World in terms of speedrunning. He apparently came up with a theoretical time save a few months ago for Twilight Princess. And this theoretical time save would have required 2 copies of the game, 2 consoles, 2 memory cards, and I'll be honest, again, Twilight Princess isn't a game I follow closely either, because if any Zelda games I follow, I'm probably more closely following Wind Waker than Twilight Princess, so I don't know too much about it. But I don't have an idea what this would actually refer to either, because I've also not played Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is a game that I plan to play with a HD version of Wii U, but that's not really relevant for this video. But the thing is, his theoretical time save is going outside of what I would call the input methods of the game. The things that are required to play the game. Because then you don't play a game with 2 consoles. Or with 2 copies of the game. You don't need 2 copies of the game to play a single game. You are speedrunning 1 game on 1 console. I feel like controllers shouldn't be limited, because if an extra controller is faster, a controller is an input method, and if it counts as an input method if there is actually a genuine reason that multiple controls could be used. For example, say in a co-op game like Woolly World, multiple controllers to control multiple Yoshis. If you have the skill to use 2 controls at once to speed up a section of the game, I feel like this is perfectly fine and there's no problem with that. But when you're going into things like this theoretical Twilight Princess time save, which requires multiple copies of the console, there I have a problem. But he brings that up as being, oh well, why is this not allowed, which requires multiple copies of the game running at once to save time, while PAL GameCube is allowed, which is 6 seconds faster. And again, I think that falls into, if it's the fastest version of the game, why have a problem with it? Your aim with speedrunning is to get the fastest time you can within the actual, without cheating is probably the best way to put it. So without using cheats, without doing things that you could not do in the rounds of the game, then as long as you can actually play the game from start to finish, then I feel like it's okay. And if that requires playing a different version of the game for faster, I don't think there's a problem there. And if I've not really had that impact me with my speed game specifically, 3D World, the JP version is a little bit faster by a couple of seconds, but I'm not going to buy a Japanese Wii U to speed that up. Especially for how minuscule the time save is. Same with, I think Woolly World might be a little bit faster, but I don't even think it is. And Rodea actually is faster on JP. And I don't find a problem with it. And it's not because I own JP, so obviously I'm going to want the faster version to be the one that's considered the best. But I actually own the English version as well, so I don't think that point really stands. I bought that as well, so. The thing is, the point that he's making about saying you should ban PAL GameCube because it's faster is really, really a bad point, because if you owned a faster version of the game, you'll want to run it. And what you're trying to say then is everyone should run the slowest version of the game so everyone's on an equal footing. But then running the slowest version of the game would be just like running the fastest version of the game. If you don't own the slowest version of the game, then you're going to have to go out and buy the slower version. If you were, say, a European, like, say, I know Demon is, then you'd probably have PAL GameCube because you lived in the PAL region. Are you saying that because PAL 6 seconds faster, you should ban PAL GameCube so that this person would have to go and get like American GameCube, an American copy of the game? It works in both ways if you're trying to limit to the fastest or the slowest version. So that argument doesn't work with me. But now to move on to the main thing I wanted to talk about, which is with Woolly World. Now, it is very clear on the leaderboards, Amiibos and Amiibo costumes are banned. And I feel like I should specify the difference just for people who aren't sure before going into the points that were made by Orca and my response to them. The Amiibos are referring to the woolly Yoshi Amiibos specifically, because they control differently to other Amiibos in the game. If any non-woolly Yoshi Amiibo, and this includes the normal Yoshi Amiibo, if put into the game, you will get an Amiibo costume. And these Amiibo costumes change the skin of Yoshi. If you have a woolly Amiibo, and this can include the giant woolly Amiibo and the other smaller woolly Amiibos, then you can get a mirrored Yoshi who will mimic your movements behind you. So you're controlling two Yoshis at once. Now at the same time, multiple controllers is here. And if you had multiple controls, you can do co-op, which has two Yoshis on the screen, but they don't mimic the movement because it says that two players are playing the game. Now, I can understand where there would be some confusion as to why we don't allow Amiibos who mimic movement and multiple controllers. And this links back to the input method argument I made. I mentioned this specifically to Orca just before he made the video. He mentioned that, and I asked contradictions because I couldn't see a contradiction, and nothing had happened to cause any discussion with Woolly World recently, so I couldn't think of any reason why he'd be referring to contradictions with it. And he brings up a point which he had clarified in the past about controls and Amiibos, but complained that both cost money, but one is banned due to money. And it goes to the control of their input methods, and Amiibos aren't. Plus, you've got the fact that Amiibos will always be faster versus 2-player due to the dexterity required. Because if an Amiibo mimics your movement, it will be copying you perfectly. If you had a second Yoshi, or a second controller, you've got to control both. So it's relying on player skill. But the main reason why there is a problem here is due to the fact that You need a controller to play the game. You don't need an amiibo to play the game. And it's as simple as that, in my opinion. It's not a case of whether, even though amiibos are faster, and you might be thinking, well, that contradicts your argument about, well, if you have a quicker version of the game, then that should be allowed. And yet I'm saying that amiibos, because they're faster, are banned. But I'm not saying that because they're faster, they're banned. I'm saying because of the way they work in the game, they should be banned, because they are not you controlling the game. They're not your movement. They are an external item that is inputted into the game that has an impact. For amiibo costumes, the rules actually differ between runs and levels, and there's a reason for this. In levels, you'll notice we say amiibo costumes are allowed providing they are not used to gain an advantage in gameplay. And I bring up the example in the boards because this was discussed with the moderators on the board before making this decision. And that's because each costume has a colour property, and you can get in-game costumes as well as the amiibo costumes. Now, some of these costumes can actually have an impact on gameplay because you might need a particular colour of wool to activate something. I'm using the example of 6/8 because that's the only current use of coloured Yoshi specifically. Because if you wanted to activate one of the switches in the level, you need different coloured eggs. There's a white, blue, green and red. Now, if you play on file 1, where you have a green Yoshi by default, your second Yoshi auto defaults to red. And this would actually activate 2 of the switches. But it would not on other files because of the different properties of the blue and the pink compared to the blue and the red. It's a light blue for the Yoshi instead of a dark blue for the Switch. But some of the amiibo costumes, like I think specifically Mega Man, there may be a different amiibo, but I know there is one of the amiibo that works on a statue, where the costume actually activates a different statue and would therefore actually be quicker, and therefore we don't allow it in levels where it would gain an advantage in gameplay, because then you go into the external mechanics affecting the gameplay. And we ban it in full runs just simply for more ease than anything else. Because you don't have, it would actually be slower anyway. If you want to use an amiibo costume for a full run and then take it off for a level where it could actually gain you an advantage in gameplay, it would be slower anyway for the runner. But it's to avoid confusion. We don't want anything where they can use an amiibo costume for half a run and then when it starts having effect on the game, to ban it. And he also brings up about 2 controllers, and we actually made sure to split it this way because you can't split between controllers. You can default to 1 controller runs, you can default to 2 controller runs, and it's not loading for me at all at the moment, so I can't show you that, but you get the idea. You can split it between controllers, you can split it between regions if you really want it, but if you had a problem with controls, you can specify you want to run 1 controller runs. But controls are an input method, and if you actually watch a run, you see what's done with multiple controllers. You're actually having to control both Yoshis at once. It is still you controlling the gameplay instead of an external mechanic. And I realise I'm starting to repeat myself, but you know. So I just feel like, to summarise, the point about money in speedrunning just doesn't really work, because the points that he brings up are things of just like, well, I own this copy of the game and you want to speedrun the fastest copy of the game, and that's an obvious thing. And buying a game is just like buying a game to play it. It's not exactly a cost of speedrunning, because anyone could buy that specific copy of the game and have it not be for speedrunning. So it's not really a cost of speedrunning in that regard, and therefore it's not a paywall. which is what he refers to it as. Meanwhile, specifically referring to Amiibos are an external thing, just like his proposed strat with Twilight Princess. They're both external factors that are affecting gameplay and not input. And that's why I feel like both are correct in banning them. And therefore, it's not a case of having double standards with money and speedrunning. Like, well, you allow money when it's convenient because you have 2 controllers. It's not a case of that. And I actually find it quite insulting that the reason that multiple controllers are allowed in Amiibos aren't is simply for the gain of the moderators on the board. That is completely untrue and an unfair assumption being made. And when things aren't fully explained for the leaderboard, such as the reasons as to why Amiibos and Amiibo costumes are banned, because there was no explanation given in the video for this. No explanation as to why multiple controllers are allowed instead, just that they were. Without an explanation, you could actually see a problem. But if you actually explain the situation fully, you can clearly see there is a reason for this. And I think it's quite wrong to try and make the assumption based on misinformation that's being given on Orcastraw's part. So therefore, I hope this has cleared that up in that regard. And I feel, as referring specifically to the money and speedrunning part, that I've give valid contradictions to his point that really there is not a problem with the cost of speedrunning, because with the cost of speedrunning, it's the fact that you've got Amiibos and external mechanics are a consistent ban, and the only thing that have a cost to them in speedrunning is a capture card, which you can record with a video camera if you really wanted, and the actual game itself, which of course you need to buy a game to play it. That's just not really even an issue in my opinion. You have to buy a game to play a game. So how that can be seen as a paywall, I don't know. But there we go. I realise I've probably rambled a bit longer on than I originally planned, but I'm probably repeating myself a couple of times as well, so apologies for that. But I feel like it was quite interesting, and I hope people actually enjoyed listening to this. So I'll catch you all another time. Thank you for watching.